every blessing to my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Thy love, oh, oh, thy love, oh. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I'm come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger wandering from the fold of God. He to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. His blood, oh, his
You may be.
Welcome to the Prolife Team podcast. I'm Jacob, and I'm here with Daniel Williams. And today we're going to talk about the abolitionist movement and the impact that it's having on the pro-life movement. Daniel, would you give us a little bit about your backstory, and then we'll just dive right into the topic and chat about it.
Sure. I'm a historian of American religion and politics. And so today I assume I'll be speaking somewhat from that historical perspective. But I've written fairly widely on the history of the pro-life movement as well as the larger history of Christians in American politics. My first book was God's Own Party, which was a history of the Christian right. But then my second book was directly a history of the pro-life movement. It was Defenders of the Unborn. That came out about 10 years ago. And then more recently, I've returned to the topic with another book called Abortion in America's Churches, which examines the theology of people on multiple sides of the abortion debate. I've also written pretty widely about the pro-life movement and abortion politics for a variety of outlets, including Christianity Today. I'm an associate professor of history at Ashland University, but I'm also a contributing writer for Christianity Today. And a couple weeks ago, I published a piece that looked briefly at some of the new trends with the abortion abolitionist movement.
Awesome. Yeah. So, tell us what your thoughts are. Would you like to start with the pro-life movement backstory, or do you want to go right into the abolitionist impact?
We can talk a little bit about the backstory of the pro-life movement to get started.
Sure.
The pro-life movement started as an organized movement in the mid-1960s. Of course, there had been people for many centuries who had been concerned about the unborn, and Christian writings that discuss concern for the unborn going back to the 2nd century, some of the earliest days of the church. But as an organized movement in the United States, it started in the mid-1960s in reaction to abortion liberalization law proposals. And that pre-Roe pro-life movement was somewhat successful at slowing the pace of abortion legalization proposals. But then Roe v. Wade happened in 1973. The pro-life movement expanded pretty dramatically out of its primarily Catholic, though not exclusively Catholic, but primarily Catholic enclaves into a much broader national movement. By the 1980s, evangelical Protestants were a dominant force in the movement, along with Catholics. And for some decades, both groups worked pretty closely together, and most of them made overturning Roe v. Wade their highest priority. There were some differences in strategy. So, for example, in the late 1980s, the pro-life movement was divided over direct action tactics associated with Operation Rescue. There were pro-life activists that strongly supported those. There were also veterans of the pro-life movement like Dr. Jack Wilkie, president of National Right to Life, who very much opposed what Operation Rescue was doing. So divisions in the pro-life movement are not new, but in recent years, meaning primarily the last 4 years since Roe v. Wade was overturned in Dobbs, I think factions within the pro-life movement have given increasing voice to very different proposals on how to go forward. Maybe that's not too surprising, since one of the unifying factors, at least as a short-term strategy, overturning Roe v. Wade, has been accomplished. And yet, as all sides in the pro-life movement have noted, the number of abortions in the United States has actually continued to increase. And so there's a sense of frustration on the part of almost all people in the movement over the state of what's happening in the United States, but a real difference of opinion as to how to proceed. And I think with the abortion abolitionist movement, we have a fairly new proposal. It goes back to the late 2010s as an organized movement, but a fairly new proposal that's rapidly gaining ground in some circles and is also causing a lot of controversy in other circles, especially among longtime pro-life activists who believe that its proposal to pass what they call equal protection laws, which would penalize all of those involved in an abortion, including the pregnant women involved, with the same penalties that are applied to murder. So people could be charged with homicide for taking abortion pills. And some people who are minority among opponents of abortion have supported that. It seems to be more people this year who support it than supported it just a couple of years ago. But there are also a sizable number of pro-life activists who still seem to be in the majority in the movement who have said not only is this a bad idea, but it would actually compromise some fundamental principles that the pro-life movement has stood for.
So, yeah, tell us more about what you know about the abolitionists, the history during the 16 years and the buildup, and I would agree that I've seen. It seems like it's a growing movement in the last couple of years with it picking up steam on people agreeing or taking on that side. But it's obviously still a minority, but it's a growing minority.
Yeah. I'll have to say I'm not an expert on the abortion abolitionist movement, but from what I've been able to determine, its strength is almost entirely among very conservative, both theologically and politically, evangelical Protestants. So in 2021, the Southern Baptist Convention passed an abortion abolitionist resolution called Resolution to Abolish Abortion. And groups such as Foundation to Abolish Abortion have been making a lot of political headway, especially in conservative Southern and some Mountain West states like Idaho, for example. If you look at the board members, the short biographies that are available online for the board members of Foundation to Abolish Abortion or for their staff, it seems to be overwhelmingly conservative evangelical Protestant as far as I've been able to tell. Similarly, with the states in which they have gained ground in terms of influence on state legislatures, those are generally very heavily evangelical states. So it does seem to me, looking at this from the outside, and again, with the caveat that I'm not an expert in the abortion abolitionist movement in particular. I'm just studying it as part of this larger history of the pro-life movement more broadly. But it does seem to me like it has this unusually close association with particular ideas among some subgroups within conservative evangelical Protestantism. And it has not gained traction to nearly the same degree with theologically conservative Catholics. Not that there would not be any theologically conservative Catholics associated with the movement, but it is striking to me from a historical perspective that while Catholics have led almost every aspect of the pro-life movement from its beginnings in the mid-1960s until now, including controversial areas like direct action in the 1980s, definitely had a lot of evangelical Protestants involved, like Randall Terry, who was evangelical Protestant at the time, but also had a number of prominent Catholics like Joseph Scheidler and numerous others. But this particular division seems not to appeal to nearly as many Catholics as to evangelical Protestants. And so, as a historian of American religion, one of the things that prompts my interest when I see something like that is to ask the question, is there something theologically within either tradition that might lead people to support this or not support this? Why would there be this religious division in a movement that traditionally has not had that stark of a religious division over a particular strategy?
Yeah. So let's speak to the bridge that we've had over decades between different religious groups that often may not have had a lot of other bridges besides the pro-life bridge. And so this bridge between Catholics, Protestants, different followers of Jesus in different groups, working together side by side on a common mission and, a common, essentially maybe 80% overlap on faith, but having 20% difference in some areas. Let's just talk about that bridge some more and that shared space that we've really enjoyed. And it seems to be a pretty unique bridge in the world that we live in, to have, these groups that often didn't overlap or touch each other, very often maybe. Seems like the pro-life bridge was probably the best bridge that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think you're right. opposition to abortion and concern for unborn human life are principles that are deeply rooted in the history of Christianity across all theological divides. So the earliest documents that we have from the ancient church on that specifically talk about abortion and decry it, forbid it, are documents that really every tradition of Christianity would share more or less, maybe not necessarily as authoritative documents, but definitely as part of their DNA. So these are documents like the Didache and some of the earliest Christian writings outside of the New Testament, like the Epistle of Barnabas, for example. And when the Protestant Reformation occurred in the 16th century, some of the most famous reformers expressed concerns about abortion and unborn human life. So John Calvin, for example, in his commentary on Exodus, in referring to a passage that's sometimes brought into the abortion debate today, gave a very clear affirmation of unborn human life being equally valuable with life after birth. So although some religious advocates for abortion rights have tried to make the claim that opposition to abortion is not deeply rooted in Christianity and that it's a recent Catholic sectarian idea, those claims have certainly been made. It seems very clear to me from the evidence that, on the contrary, opposition to abortion and concern for unborn human life can be traced back to the earliest days of the church, and that when there was a division between the Eastern Church and the Western Church in the 11th century, or in the 16th century between Catholics and Protestants, initially those divisions did not affect the abortion debate. There were obviously many arguments between Catholics and Protestants during the Reformation era, but the question of abortion was not one of those arguments. And so I think that informed the discussion when abortion legalization began to be seriously proposed at the state level in the 1960s. There were a number of liberal Protestants that did support abortion rights, and I detail that at some length in my book, Abortion in America's Churches. But while it took a few years, evangelical Protestants did end up on the pro-life side of the divide. And they were never really supporters of abortion rights. There were individual evangelical Protestants that did, especially before Roe, give some support for abortion legalization. But the dominant strand of thinking in evangelical Protestantism before Roe was that abortion was generally wrong, though most of them did not take quite as absolutist a stance on that as theologically faithful Catholics. But after Roe, evangelical Protestants moved by and large from thinking that abortion was mostly wrong, with maybe a couple of exceptions for rape and incest and possibly dangerous to a woman's health, though not everyone agreed on that, moved from that stance toward thinking that abortion actually was a more serious problem, and that maybe it was wrong in all or nearly all circumstances. And one of the instrumental voices in moving the conversation to that point among evangelicals was Francis Schaeffer. In the mid to late 1970s, he co-authored a book and documentary with Dr. C. Everett Koop, who would become Surgeon General in the Reagan administration, that talked about the evils of abortion, that really echoed very much most of the arguments that Catholics have been making for the previous decade or so. So as the Christian right emerged as an evangelical-dominated coalition, it made opposition to abortion a central part of its platform. But to a much greater degree than had been the case among Catholics, also linked that to a larger conservative program. And over the course of the 1980s, a number of Catholics came to accept that larger conservative framing of the issue. Not all Catholics did. And there was some division among Catholics over whether there should be a consistent life ethic being pushed, or whether abortion should really be a standalone issue. Both groups in this debate tended to see abortion as a great evil, but the question was how to frame the issue. And that did tend to divide Catholics politically. And so there were definitely divisions among Catholics, and there were different perspectives as well. And when Catholics and evangelicals discussed this issue, while they agreed on a great deal, most evangelicals who joined the pro-life movement were pretty comfortable with capital punishment. A number of Catholics who joined the movement believed that capital punishment was not compatible with their view of protecting human life. And so I would say that while the two groups were not identical in their viewpoint on all human life issues, and while there were internal differences among evangelicals and internal differences among Catholics, nevertheless, over the course of the 1980s and beyond, what characterized the movement was an overwhelming consensus on the central points. The idea that human life should be protected from the moment of conception, the idea that abortion was a great evil that needed to be stopped, and the idea that there should be some sort of, ideally, a national constitutional recognition of unborn human life. And I think pro-life activists often realized they couldn't accomplish all of that immediately, and there were differences between gradualists or incrementalists and those who wanted some more immediate action. But the philosophical framing was pretty similar.
Yeah. So, yeah, speaking of incrementalists versus, people that want, the abolitionists, I think everyone would agree. Let me know what your thoughts are on this, but I think everyone would agree, whether they're incremental or abolitionist, that they would love to see it completely abolished. But the way to get there is by taking what ground is available incrementally, more so than setting the bar to the point where it never gets achieved. What are your thoughts on that, and how would you reflect that in the history? Or what are your thoughts on about that in the history?
Yeah, that debate has been going on for quite some time. In fact, in the 1980s, one of the reasons that many people joined direct action organizations like Operation Rescue was that they were getting frustrated with the incrementalists, and they were feeling like nothing was really changing. And that, by the way, of course, characterizes nearly all movements, all social movements. So in the civil rights movement of the 1960s, there were debates between people who favored more gradualist measures of working within the system versus those who wanted to engage in more militant action. Maybe even more relevant for this, given that the abortion abolitionists have taken their name very deliberately from the abolitionist movement against slavery. In the anti-slavery movement of the time period just before the Civil War, there were significant divisions between those who wanted immediate action, and maybe the most radical of those would have been someone like John Brown leading a raid on the South in order to start a slave revolt, versus those who believed in working very gradually. And Abraham Lincoln, for example, was very much a gradualist when it came to abolishing slavery. Now, ultimately, of course, he did issue the Emancipation Proclamation, and he was very happy to do so. But in the years leading up to that, he was very much working within the political system and supporting measures that he believed would limit the expansion of slavery, not abolish slavery immediately, which before the Civil War seemed to be politically impossible. So this is a very old debate. It is not unique to the debate over abortion, but it's not too surprising that for people who recognize the seriousness of the issue and who believe, which is true, I think, of all pro-life activists, that this is murder, this is killing a human being. There are a number of people who would be frustrated with measures that will not stop abortions this year or next year. And I think that's one of the greatest appeals of the abortion abolitionist movement is this promise that you can stop abortion immediately. Now, for the opponents of the abortion abolitionist movement, they would make at least two countercharges. One is there's nothing that the abortion abolitionist movement has proposed that they would say would stop abortion immediately. And secondly, they would also say, even more seriously, that the types of things that the abortion abolitionist movement would like to do actually would make it more difficult to try to reduce the abortion rate and gain political alliances that might actually have an effect. So that debate, which is actually somewhat similar with the debate about direct action in the late 1980s that the pro-life movement had, I think speaks to this larger question that is really a philosophical question going well beyond the pro-life movement, which is, how do you create political change? Do you create political change by demonstrating in the streets, so to speak, metaphorically? The abortion abolitionist movement, of course, is not literally doing that, but taking strong-armed measures that are going to force a change in the hope that would apply enough pressure to stop whatever evil you're fighting? Or do you look at the political layout and say, where can we find common ground with our opponents? Can we at least agree on some measures that would move the country in the right direction? And are we able to accomplish something by working within the political system? That's an age-old question, and there are no easy ways to resolve that apart from a lot of detailed conversations about how politics works, about the state of the political landscape, and about empirical studies that perhaps can be taken as to the possible effects of particular legislative proposals.
So Daniel, when I was in school, I always struggled with history because I had a hard time remembering lots of facts and stories. But and I wouldn't sit still enough to read and memorize my history. But one thing I do remember is that that people would often say, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And so I'm wondering, where could we learn from? What historical accounts can we learn from that will impact this where we're at today in the pro-life movement? Perhaps, like, could we learn from what's where another country has gone who's more progressive than we are, or who's in a position that might reflect where we're heading? Or what could we learn from, like you mentioned, when it came to abolishing slavery? What lessons are there that may impact our decisions today, or help us know what's not to avoid, or help us not repeat? And then also, like, what other stories? Like, are there stories in the Bible or in other parts of our history, like learning from how the enemy went after and used infanticide to try and go after Jesus or to go after Moses? And I'm wondering, like, what other stories could we learn from, or historical accounts, so that we better equipped to not fall into that trap of repeating history?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good question. It's more difficult to answer than we might imagine because, while there are repeating cycles in history, they don't always look exactly the same. And so the lessons that we take from history are not necessarily the type of principles that could be compared to a mathematical proof or even a science experiment, where if you've set everything up correctly, you should be able to get repeated results that can be verified. And that's not really the way history works, because you never have the exact same factors. And so the pro-life movement predicted from the very beginning in the 1960s that legalized abortion would lead to a disrespect for human life. And they predicted that it would lead to infanticide and euthanasia. Those were the two big issues that they talked about. And there's certainly some element of that. So for several years after this, in fact, decades after this, I think opponents could look at this and say, look, this hasn't led to anything like that. So I think we're fine. But in the last 10 years, there's been a marked increase in Americans' support for right to die legislation, physician-assisted suicide. And of course, in Canada, it's been widely legalized. In the US, it's been partially legalized, depending on the state. So that's what pro-life activists predicted as early as 1965. Maybe things didn't occur exactly on the same time scale that they predicted or in exactly the same way. But I do think that the general trajectory that they predicted does seem to be unfolding to a certain extent. Now, they also predicted that eventually the U.S., if it went down this road, could end up like Nazi Germany. And hopefully they're wrong about that. But it's always difficult to know really what the next step will be in a particular moral progression or moral decline. As far as lessons for the pro-life movement's strategy, I think I would perhaps look at this larger question of what can historical examples tell us about laws that work and laws that don't, and how a new societal moral consensus arrives. And in general, with legislation, it's difficult to think of an example where a law that is not supported by very many people will accomplish something without protest. And so I think right now it's pretty clear that nationally there's not national support for a law against abortion on the national scale. And so if for example, the U.S. government, the federal government, was to creatively apply the Comstock Act, for example, to try to ban abortion in the United States, I would predict, based on where public opinion is now and based on what I've seen from historical examples, that would lead to significant backlash and significant noncompliance. To get to widespread compliance with something, you really have to move to a point where the opponents of a measure are in such a small minority that they don't have the power to lead a mass movement against this. And that's relatively rare. It has happened. It doesn't usually happen easily. And I think when we drill down, we find that it's very easy for people to overreach. So, for example, with the civil rights movement of the 1960s, there was pretty widespread support among whites, especially in the North, for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act. There was not nearly as much support for busing across town to try to achieve integration of schools and affirmative action. Both of those led to backlash in the 1970s. And I could give you a number of other examples as well, but I think those type of examples are principles I think that I would encourage the pro-life movement to keep in mind. I know that abortion abolitionists don't like to think in those terms at all, but I would say that you have to look at where public opinion is, and you have to say, okay, what is achievable, and what are the areas where there's majority support against, there's majority opposition to this, and so it's not likely we're going to be able to achieve this without a backlash. And if we have the courts impose it, you can expect a grassroots movement to try to overturn that, which is exactly what happened with both busing and with affirmative action. I know the abolitionist movement, the abortion abolitionist movement, is taking its cue, taking its inspiration from the abolitionist movement before the Civil War that tried to abolish slavery. I think we can certainly admire people in the abolitionist movement. I am concerned about some of the most extreme tactics that some of them used, like John Brown. Both as a Christian and as a citizen, I'm not sure that really that really accomplished something useful. But I would say this to people who would draw a direct line between the abolitionist movement and the abortion abolitionist movement today, is that according to the latest scholarship on the subject, I read a book that just came out this year that was looking at the abolitionist movement. It said on the eve of the Civil War in 1860, the percentage of Northern whites who favored immediate abolition and full racial equality, the most radical stance, was no higher than 2% of the population. Now, there was a much larger percentage of people who were opposed to slavery or opposed to the expansion of slavery, but that sense of immediate abolition and full legal equality, it was just a very extreme position associated with people like William Lloyd Garrison and others, but they did not have a whole lot of political influence. And it really took a civil war to change public opinion on the question and move legislation that really didn't have a chance before the Civil War. So we can be thankful the legislation occurred, but I think we also have to ask the question of the abortion abolitionist movement, assuming you're not planning a civil war, what is your plan to try to get support for these measures that, at least at the moment, if they were likely to be passed, would result in a significant backlash, almost certainly.
Interesting. Can you tell us what are your thoughts about the abortion pill? And based on what I understand as of today, the abortion pill here in the U.S. might represent about 2/3 of abortions. However, in like the UK, it's estimated between 80 to 97%, or about 93% of abortions are done with the abortion pill. And I'm almost wondering, is there a lesson for us to learn from a group that's, gone further, with the abortion pill being the most common type of abortion? And again, maybe it's based on all the variables, but there's probably some lessons for us to learn with, maybe in regards to their socialized medicine, maybe in regards to just, the freedom of speech that they currently don't have, and we do have. So I don't know, I'm just wondering, so when it comes to the abortion pill, maybe let's talk about, the history of where that has come from and where we are. And again, trying to learn, I'm always looking for where we're going as well as where we've been, because I'm trying to figure out what to do today and get ready for tomorrow. And so,
The abortion pill has been around, of course, for a while. Been around for about 30 years, but was approved by the FDA for use in the United States in the year 2000, and it took off pretty slowly at first. But I think the reason that it has gained ground so rapidly today is, first of all, with COVID, and secondly, after that, with restrictions on abortion in more conservative states. And so it was, once people began using the abortion pill more frequently, I think they turned to it not only because it was easier to obtain, but also as a matter of perceived convenience. The abortion pill, as I think we both know, is not quite as consequence-free or as maybe easy to use as what people in the abortion rights movement have tried to say that it is. But nevertheless, it does privatize the abortion experience. It makes it possible to have a self-administered abortion with minimal outside medical interference. And I think that's very attractive to a lot of people. And of course, as more people take the abortion pill, then the movement for it accelerates. And I think there's probably no turning back the clock unless there's a widespread public perception that the abortion pill is not safe, which is not something that I really see as a perception that's developing outside of pro-life circles. I think that we're likely to see increased percentages of people that rely on the abortion pill. And as that happens, I think the surgical abortion services are probably going to be reduced just as a matter of supply and demand. If 70% of people start using the abortion pill, and then 80%, who are having 70 or 80% of people who are having abortions, well, eventually, some abortion clinics may start reducing the number of hours that a physician would be available for a surgical abortion, and really start promoting the abortion pill. And so it's a cycle that feeds on itself. And I suspect that's what's happened in Europe as people just rely increasingly on the abortion pill. That becomes the default, and surgical abortions are reserved for more exceptional cases, late-term abortions, that sort of thing, that would not be covered by an abortion pill. So then the question is, well, what does this do for the pro-life movement? I think it makes things considerably more difficult, because it moves abortion from being an issue of service that's provided at designated locations where you can have protesters, where you can have visibility, and starts to move it into a different realm. So if we're looking for historical examples, I would look at Prohibition. Prohibition was very successful at shutting down the saloon as an institution. Saloons, of course, were businesses. Businesses can be shut down. They're very public. It was not very successful at getting rid of alcohol. In fact, not very successful at all at that. And in the same way, the pro-life movement might end up with a Pyrrhic victory where abortion clinics, as standalone clinics with abortions provided on site, become relatively rare, while mail order abortion pills can be something that proliferates. And we've had a decades-long war on drugs that has had mixed success at best, outright failure at worst, in terms of trying to stop drugs. And so I suspect that the pro-life movement is going to have to pivot. It's not going to be a very easy pivot, but it's probably going to have to pivot from attempts to reduce the supply to attempts to reduce demand. I think there are still possible ways that the supply could theoretically be reduced if the FDA, for example, banned mifepristol. That might be one such route, but I suspect, given the ease of ordering pills from overseas, that would actually not have as pronounced an effect as we might like. And so if that's the case, if there's nothing that the government can do at either the state or federal level, and certainly not at the state level, as we've seen in the last couple of years, to significantly reduce the supply of abortion pills, then we would have to say that the next step would have to be finding ways to reduce demand, whatever form that might take. Can we expand the work of crisis pregnancy centers and in providing help to women who are considering abortion? Can we create a changed national conversation so that people value unborn human life? Are there other things that we can do? And that's probably going to have to be the path forward for the pro-life movement. But I think as a whole, the pro-life movement is not quite there yet. We're still in this transition stage. Everything is happening so quickly. But if, as I think is likely, the abortion pill becomes the overwhelming default for people who are thinking about abortions, then eventually a change in approach will be necessary.
So in the beginning of this movement, from the beginning of my understanding of the movement, when we didn't have many pregnancy clinics, maybe we had 0 to 10, back at that point, maybe it was 52 years ago or 48 to 52 years ago. And when people wanted to do work back then, my understanding is they set up these hotlines as one of their first ideas, and then people could call, and then they would try and help someone remotely over the phone. And today, I feel like we're experiencing a bit of a let's go back to our roots story, with people getting telemedicine medicine care, remote care or remote pills from the abortion industry, and they're not going into the brick and mortars like they used to get in-person services, moving the sidewalk to someone's mailbox where they get it in the mail. But essentially getting it remotely, they get it shipped to them. Maybe they don't even get a phone call or anything, and it's just simply them ordering it from India but so essentially getting the pills remotely, and then if we're able to help someone, getting that person to go to an in-person. Oh, I think I might have just lost you. Whoop, we can pause here. Hopefully you can come back. I can fix this in post. No. Let me see if I can call you. Teams. No worries. Hey, Daniel, looks like I lost you. Can you reconnect?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, take your time. No worries. I can edit this in the post. No worries.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
I'll see you online in a minute.
Okay. Hey, no worries. Yeah, I'll edit that in post. Hopefully I don't. I left a big gap, so it'll be easy for me to identify.
Okay.
So I'll start over with that question. At the end, I might want you to go to riverside.com/upload.
Okay.
I'll go over that at the very end, just in case there's more than one file to be uploaded. So the first part may be low quality unless we can get it uploaded, but it may be okay. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start over here with that question. So in the beginning of the movement, 52 years ago, when there weren't many brick and mortars, some people provided hotlines for helping someone when they're in a situation, doing, like, for example, Sister Paula. I know her, I remember hearing stories about her answering the phone and helping people remotely. And fast forward to today, where we have many people getting the pill shipped to them or getting it remotely, maybe via telemedicine, or maybe just doing do-it-yourself, ordering it remotely without a prescription. And so there seems to be an opportunity for us to learn from that ambition and that just simply responding to the need back in the beginning of our movement by answering the phone and helping someone who doesn't live in our Tri-County area. Can you just talk about helping someone remotely and how that may what you may know from the beginning and how that may impact where we're at today? And because in the beginning we had a big desert where we didn't have a pregnancy clinic to send someone to, and today we still have deserts. And the UK's got a big desert. Canada's got some pretty big desert space, and then in the US we have several deserts where there's not coverage by a local clinic. And I'm trying to imagine how telecare can help us support those deserts. And just like you to speak about that concept of telecare, remote service, and maybe the history of that, if as you may know it.
Yeah, I think you're right. So organizations like Birthright International, for example, or CareNet started out as organizations that would have hotlines. Originally, very low tech operations. They would just take turns. People on the team would just take turns standing by to answer phones at all hours of the day. Now, I think a number of local crisis pregnancy centers are supporting or tied into networks that rely on internet contact. So people can answer a social media ad, for example, click on that, and then immediately get put in touch with an organization that can care for them. And so I think that's how a lot of the work of crisis pregnancy centers is being conducted. I know the local crisis pregnancy center in Ashland, Ohio, which is where I am, has for the past couple of years relied on these internet apps. So yes, I imagine that will probably be helpful. And I think the more that the word can get out, and certainly there are billboards and other other forms of advertising and have been for decades to try to encourage women facing a crisis pregnancy to reach out for resources. There are definitely groups that are trying to help them. I think that we probably should think more about the reasons people have abortions. And so crisis pregnancy centers, I think, play a vital role in meeting needs on a short-term basis. And then the question is, are there larger structural issues that could help reduce abortion? So I think Americans United for Life has supported legislative proposals that so far haven't been passed at the federal level, though there are some states that have adopted some of these measures to make birth free. People are often saddled with significant medical bills when they go to the hospital to have a child, and for all of the months leading up to that and all the months after that, with doctor's visits and vaccinations and other issues. If, as some surveys indicate, that more than 50% of women who are having abortions say that financial reasons are a factor in their decision, and if it's the case that about 60% or so of women having abortions already have at least one child, so it's not like this is their first pregnancy. They're not opposed to having a child. It's that they are well aware of the financial burden and other forms of responsibility that come with having an additional child. And so if we can think about that, think about how we can perhaps reach out to people in that situation with compassion, I think that would be very much in keeping with the historic commitments of the pro-life movement. It would also be very, very much opposed to what I think the abortion abolitionists are trying to do. And for that reason, I think it would provide a good counter witness. So the pro-life movement would not just say, well, we're going to support a gradualist measure or incremental laws to make abortion more difficult. And people from the outside can say, well, that doesn't seem to be working. The abortion abolitionists seem to have a plan that looks like it's actually going to hold people accountable for abortion. And if that's the debate, I think the pro-life movement is on losing ground. It can't really make a claim that its own strategies are necessarily working to try to reduce the abortion rate. But on the other hand, if the pro-life movement can say it's not just a matter of trying to make abortions more difficult to obtain, although that's not to the extent that can be done, that maybe that's helpful. But more importantly, it's about offering this holistic form of care to say, how do we take people who are some of the most vulnerable people in society, including not just the unborn, but a lot of women facing crisis situations, women who are predominantly low income, women who are facing unstable relationships and who are experiencing all of the factors that tend to lead people to consider abortion. If we can say, we want to create a more compassionate society for all of these people. We want to give people more options. We want to say to them that abortion is not a choice you have to make. Abortion, there's something better, and we're inviting you to choose that and equipping you with the resources to be able to make a meaningful choice.
Interesting. When it comes to your historical research, does it ever, have you seen data or history, recordings of how someone connects with a pregnancy clinic? Has that ever been in part of the historical document, the documents that you research? So what I've seen, I would say 15 plus years ago, so before 2011, pregnancy clinics would always reach client. The number one way that they would reach clients was word of mouth by a friend or word of mouth by a professional. And then since 2011 through today, it's been gradually and now regularly Google/internet is, the way that they reach clients, and word of mouth is second on that list. And then below that would be signage, social media, billboards, and other things would be very, trailing. Like, for example, Yellow Pages used to be on the list, and it's fallen off completely many years ago. And so I'm wondering, is there any like history on, marketing methods? Is that something that you read about or you've seen?
Yeah. So I think traditionally the uh, crisis pregnancy clinics tended to reach people in some fairly traditional ways. So number one, location. Uh, an inordinately high number of these clinics were located directly across the street or just on the other side of the shopping center from Planned Parenthood clinics or other abortion clinics. That was very typical. So they would deliberately try to get a space as close as possible to the abortion clinic so that people would see it. Uh, the Yellow Pages were very common. In fact, there were a number of controversies about that, about how people could advertise. And some Yellow Pages companies had to implemented rules that you had, if you were not providing abortion services, you had to say very directly in your ad, "We do not provide abortion services." And so there were some uh, there were some controversies about advertising. Also, billboard advertising, ads in student newspapers on campuses. Those were all very common ways in which people would try to reach women who were experiencing a crisis pregnancy and considering an abortion. But I think you're right. I don't have the numbers on this, but from what I've heard anecdotally, people are generally finding both abortion pills online and finding crisis pregnancy centers online. That the entire search is an online search, and I guess that's not too surprising. By definition, the people who are considering abortion or facing crisis pregnancy are on the younger side, presumably hardly any over the age of 45, and average would be in their mid 20s, with about half the women below that. So I think for Gen Z, which is primarily what we're talking about, the very youngest millennials and Gen Zers, online searches are how business is done. That's just how you live life. So it's not too surprising that would be the case with crisis pregnancy centers. I do think that one of the frustrations that a lot of crisis pregnancy centers are experiencing is that the majority of the women who come into the crisis pregnancy center are women who were not planning to have an abortion to begin with. Now, I think those women still need to be helped, and I think crisis pregnancy centers are performing a very useful service in doing that. They should not be in the business just of trying to stop abortions. But one of the frustrations they feel is that increasingly a woman who walks into a Planned Parenthood clinic is not trying to make up her mind. She has already made up her mind when she walks in, or when she orders abortion pills. She's already made up her mind as to what she wants to do. And I think that suggests that while the traditional strategy of a crisis pregnancy center, which is if you can just get them in and then show a color ultrasound, that maybe that will be enough to change the conversation, that strategy may not be enough. I think there's probably the need for some larger conversations that maybe take place before someone faces a crisis pregnancy, or for maybe a conversation that takes place in other venues as well. One of the things, of course, that abortion pills, a culture of abortion pills tends to encourage is a very quick decision on this, because abortion pills can only be used in the very earliest weeks of pregnancy. After the first trimester, they're widely considered, even by people who are abortion providers, as unsafe to use for second trimester pregnancies. And so there's a very limited time frame in which people have to make a decision. And so oftentimes they make the decision quickly, and then a crisis pregnancy center doesn't necessarily get a chance to intervene. Um, that's a difficult issue. Crisis pregnancy centers have, I think, struggled with that for years, but it's become even more of an issue now with the changes in technology and the increasing shift toward abortions earlier and earlier in pregnancy.
When it comes to pregnancy clinics and the names that they've had over the years, what have you seen in the? Oh, is my internet? Can you hear me? Okay.
You're
I'm
breaking
back.
up a little, but
Sorry.
I
Yeah.
think I can make it
My,
out.
yeah, my internet broke up for a moment there. So when it comes to the names that pregnancy clinics have had over the years, many started off as birthrights, and then there were lots of CareNets, and there were several, crisis pregnancy center of city name. And then maybe 20 years ago, many started changing their names to try and be more friendly to use new language to reach women, using the word care, using the word help, options, just a wide range of names. What kind of, from have you read any historical, part of your historical research, what are your thoughts on the names and and that trending or changes that has happened over this span of 60 or 50-ish years that we've had?
Yeah. Well, I think that in general they have tried to adopt names that have not necessarily signaled to people that they were going to try to talk women out of an abortion, and so they wanted a name that sounded more neutral. And I think that's created a fair amount of controversy. Certainly, there was obviously about a decade ago the famous case that originated out of California when California tried to or did actually mandate that crisis pregnancy centers had to post notices of where abortions could be obtained, and
Oh yeah, NIFLA versus Becerra. That
right,
was the
and
Supreme Court case.
so the Supreme Court thankfully struck that down on free speech grounds, but uh, that has been a perennial issue of complaint for supporters of abortion rights. I think that what I would really like to see would be for the pro-life movement to preempt a lot of that criticism by actually becoming medical care clinics. And I think in my own town, there's a slight shift in that direction with some licensed medical practitioners moving into the site. Here's a crisis pregnancy center that started as most crisis pregnancy centers do, without necessarily a registered nurse, let alone a physician on site. Essentially just people who care about the pro-life cause, mostly from local churches, and coming together and saying, let's offer help and care, and maybe have some clothing donation, baby clothing donations, diaper donations, other things that we can offer to women. But that's, other than an ultrasound machine, that's essentially what a lot of these crisis pregnancy centers consisted of in their early years. But as their fundraising has increased, and as the movement has grown, I think it is poised. Some of these crisis pregnancy centers are poised to do more. And if they could truly become medical clinics with an OBGYN on staff, at least part-time, and with registered nurses there to help, where they could offer more comprehensive medical care, I think they could become rivals to the Planned Parenthood clinics. And I think it would also help deflect some of the criticism over names, because if they're called something like Women's Healthcare Clinic, then that wouldn't be viewed as deceitful if you really do have trained medical staff, licensed medical staff on site providing genuine medical services. Now, if a crisis pregnancy center can't do that, I'm a very strong supporter of transparency and honesty. You shouldn't claim to offer what you can't do, what you're not offering. So crisis pregnancy centers, do need to be upfront with both the public and with their clients over what they are and are not able to do. But I think there's not necessarily a one size fits all name that will do that or not do that.
Yeah, when it comes to non-medical centers, they can provide referrals to a medical pregnancy clinic, and then medical pregnancy clinics can just promote their medical services. So I think, a non-medical pregnancy center can provide options, conversations about someone's options, and then they can refer someone to that neighboring clinic who does provide those medical services under the supervision of a licensed medical professional. And so I think and I think a lot of groups, like you're right, a lot of them start off as a non-medical center because the barrier to entry is lower, and then eventually they find that in order to provide more service locally, instead of having to do referrals, they need to take the next step of going medical. And NIFLA and Heartbeat and many other and CareNet have helped a lot of groups take that next step in going medical and providing direction on how to do those, how to make that change. Let's see. Would you speak about the history of Planned Parenthood? And I know we don't. I mean, that's probably a long or a big topic, but yeah, what are your thoughts about the history of Planned Parenthood?
Yeah. Well, it started a little over a century ago with Margaret Sanger. It grew out of what was called the American Birth Control League, and then that became Planned Parenthood Federation of America, commonly just called Planned Parenthood. For several decades, it was dedicated to providing birth control and birth control information. It wasn't until the 1960s that any Planned Parenthood directors publicly started supporting abortion, though one of the directors of Planned Parenthood, Alan Guttmacher, was a very early supporter of legalized abortions, and so was talking about that issue even in the 1950s before most others were. So Planned Parenthood, while it was not an organization that provided abortions or that even engaged in abortion referrals or abortion advocacy for several decades, was in a position to provide early leadership for the abortion law liberalization movement, which became an abortion legalization or abortion rights movement. So it has certainly long been associated with abortion, and for that reason, I think it's been public enemy number one for the pro-life movement for a long time. I think that the pro-life movement has tended to exaggerate Margaret Sanger's own interest in eugenics and racism. Not that those are not part of her plan. She was definitely someone who did support the eugenics movement, but so did a lot of people in the 1920s. It was not particularly unique to Planned Parenthood. The eugenics movement was very widespread. And things that Margaret Sanger did say about race and eugenics, I think, have in recent years embarrassed even some of the Planned Parenthood leaders who have tried to distance themselves, certainly, from that part of the history. I think in dialoguing with people who are associated with Planned Parenthood or who support Planned Parenthood, I think it's probably most productive to recognize some genuine philosophical differences rather than accuse people necessarily of being tied to a eugenics past. To say instead, okay, well, why do we have a difference of perspective on this issue? What are the fundamental beliefs that would lead people associated with Planned Parenthood to say that every pregnancy must be chosen for it to be chosen and wanted for it to be meaningful and valuable, and versus those in the pro-life movement who've tended to see life as human life is valuable for reasons beyond just the view of the person giving birth. That is unborn human life something of intrinsic worth apart from the desires of people to have or not have a child? And that's where I see Planned Parenthood starting from the wrong foundation from its very beginning. That even though Margaret Sanger in the 1920s was not supporting abortion and repeatedly said that she was not a supporter of abortion at that point, the philosophy that she had about human life, I think, not surprisingly, led Planned Parenthood to become an early endorser of the idea of legalized abortion, because the framework from the very beginning was that unborn human life is not something that that has intrinsic value and that we would welcome apart from our own just personal desire to have a child. And that I think, from a pro-life perspective, is a very problematic foundation.
Wow. Thank you, Daniel, so much for answering all these questions and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. And for those who are listening, if you have a question for Daniel, feel free to send it along to the podcast, and I'll be glad to forward it to him or share his contact info. But essentially, we would invite questions about, what questions would you have about our pro-life history and this work that we could share and pass on to Daniel. And Daniel, one of the questions I like to ask everybody on this podcast is, where have you seen God's fingerprints in this pro-life work or this pro-life research? Where have you seen God show up in this space?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it's really remarkable that the pro-life movement has had the impact that it has on American society. So we can look at some of its failures, and maybe today we talked about some of those, but it is really remarkable that so many churches from such different theological traditions across the Christian spectrum have united on the principle that unborn life is sacred, that people who are created in the image of God need to be honored, valued, and protected. And so I have seen numerous churches move toward that stance. So if we look at where Christians were 50 or 60 years ago, today we are in a place where the conversation, at least among Christians, has moved much more toward a life-affirming perspective. And so I see God at work in that decades-long conversation.
Awesome. And one of the primary audiences for this podcast is pregnancy clinic leadership. And what would you like to say to pregnancy clinic leaders that they may find encouraging?
Yeah. Well, I would say that I think this is probably the most important work of the pro-life movement today, at a time where the politics have become rather complicated, and it's difficult to see a viable strategy to significantly reduce abortions through expanded political advocacy, though I think that work will continue going on. The most valuable thing that can happen as far as saving unborn lives is probably conversations, one person at a time. And that's what crisis pregnancy centers are doing. That's what they've been doing for decades. And I think this is extremely important work.
And then going back to that question of what can we, learn from history, and I know all the variables change, but what, if you could make a prediction for like something that we should be aware of that might be coming around the corner based on trends or based on, how history sometimes repeats itself, what's something that we could, consider or pray about or try and be prepared for that might be coming down the road based on pattern that we have in our history here?
Yeah. Well, I think a larger national disrespect for human life is something that the pro-life movement needs to look out for, not just on abortion, but on other issues. So the very rapid public opinion shift on right to die legislation is something that I think should concern the pro-life movement. I know there have been pragmatic reasons why pro-life organizations have felt like they needed to focus very narrowly on abortion. This was why some of them got into the movement to begin with, and this is what they feel unites their coalition. But I think that as the national conversation about abortion changes, and as other issues also come to the fore, I think if pro-life movement leaders could remember the original basis for the movement, which was it was never just about abortion. It was always abortion is connected to this larger concern about human life. I think if people could look for ways in which they could affirm the value of human life in every area, whatever comes up, I think that would be important. I think as we discussed, there are probably some difficult years ahead for the pro-life movement. I think the shape of national politics and state politics leads me to think that it will be very difficult for the pro-life movement to significantly restrict abortion in states that have not already taken the step toward significantly restricting it. And so a lot of the debate, like the debate between mainstream pro-lifers and abortion abolitionists, is taking place around the rather narrow issue of how stringently the states that already have restrictive abortion policies should try to make their abortion laws. So in areas where abortion abolitionist equal protection acts were introduced, those are states like South Carolina and Idaho that already have some of the strictest abortion laws in the nation. And unfortunately, if the pro-life movement is caught up in that debate, how do you reiterate your ban on abortion in a state that's already banned it? That's maybe not a very productive place to be. I can understand why people in those states would feel frustrated that they haven't been able to, despite those abortion bans, actually stop abortion in their states. But what I would really like to see would be a movement that can speak into a larger culture that, unfortunately, for parts of the United States, will look increasingly like the culture in Canada or Britain, where you can expect neither political party to really want to do much on the issue of abortion. And so then how do you create a conversation that will lead people toward a more life-affirming stance when they live in a culture that is not life-affirming?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm, as you talk, I'm thinking about Texas having, very restrictive laws on having an abortion in certain states, but in those states that have very restrictive laws, there's the abortion pill, is not being stopped in the mail, like it is still being shipped in, and for some states, they are surrounded by other states where the abortion pill can be obtained. So someone simply drives across the straight line and, then the laws change. I'm wondering, what could we learn from the Prohibition movement when it came to, alcohol being outlawed? And when it comes to these pro-life states where abortion is being outlawed, but yet they're surrounded by other states, or there's also the U.S. mail, and abortion pills can be made to be very small when it comes to being shipped.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, the lessons, I think, are not very encouraging. Once you move away from surgical abortion service, which can be regulated to a certain extent, to something as small as the abortion pill, it's much more difficult to prevent that from moving across borders. And certainly, Prohibition was a case in point, both during Prohibition and then also in the decades after that, where for several decades there were states and then after that counties that were dry. And in general, dry counties did not find it very easy to restrict alcohol in their county. They could restrict its open sale, but they couldn't restrict people from bringing it in, just as is the case more recently, of course, with marijuana. Marijuana legalization in certain states made it easier then to cross for people to cross state lines with that particular drug. So drug regulation in the United States has faced some difficult challenges, and if that's where abortion regulation moves, which it seems like it is, if it becomes something like drug regulation, that's not very encouraging, I would say, for the pro-life movement. And in the case of drugs, even the threat of draconian sentences, which is essentially what the abortion abolitionists are trying to do with the equal protection laws, those have not been particularly effective at stopping the drug trade. I mean, maybe one could argue that they've had some marginal effect, but even that's debatable. Certainly, they haven't eradicated drug use altogether by any stretch of the imagination. And so I think that's what we would have to realize is likely to happen with attempts to stop the abortion pill. But the additional hurdle there is for a state like Texas or a state like South Carolina or a state like Idaho, even if you were to get majority support in your state legislature to pass an Equal Protection Act, you don't have majority support in the rest of the country for that. And so the modern analogy would be, suppose there was one state out there, one state or a couple of states that had really stringent laws against marijuana while the entire rest of the country legalized this and was just fine with it. And would we expect that to necessarily work? Well, Mississippi had state prohibition on alcohol until the mid-1960s, and it was not working in Mississippi in the 30 years after Prohibition, after much of the rest of the country had legalized alcohol. Mississippi's state prohibition was not stopping people from drinking by any stretch of the imagination. So that leads back to the point about maybe thinking about trying to reduce demand rather than just trying to restrict supply.
Wow. Well, thank you, Daniel, so much for being on here. Are there any final thoughts or things that you'd like to share that I didn't ask you about?
Yeah, well, it seems like we covered a lot of ground. Thank you for that. I think I would just encourage your listeners to think about the larger question of how we can affirm life. That the goal is not just stopping people from having abortions, although obviously abortion is of deep concern to all of us. But ultimately, why I think we care about the issue is because we care about life, and so anything that we can do to try to affirm that, to encourage it, is a worthy measure in this larger campaign. So thanks.
Awesome. Yeah. So Daniel, would you close our podcast with a prayer for our movement?
Sure. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to talk with Jacob about these important issues. I pray for the pro-life cause in this country. I pray that all of us who are involved in this work will keep the larger picture in mind. We'll realize that this is about protecting people who bear your image. It's about affirming the value of human life that you have created. I pray that we will not get caught up in partisan debates and get distracted by other things that may take us away from being a witness to the world around us. And I pray that as we enter a moment where it seems like there's rising public acceptance of abortion and other attacks on human life, at least in some parts of our country, I pray that you would give people who are on the front lines in this struggle the grace to continue. I pray for the crisis pregnancy centers, that you would connect them with the people who can be touched with the message of life-affirming care. I pray that the pro-life movement will continue to grow and that ultimately it will be a light in this country and in this world. It's through Jesus that I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Stand at the crossroads. Ask for the ancient ways, find rest for your soul. Stand at the crossroads. Ask for the ancient ways, find rest for your soul. The spirit, the wind, you don't know where it comes from or where it goes, but you feel it blow away. The street swords away, and home there is death. When your faithful compassion renews every day, in the street swords away, at home there is death, but your faithful compassion renews every day. Keep me humble, Lord, disciple me in your ancient ways. Teach me to praise your ancient ways. Teach me to praise your holy name. Teach me to praise with my whole heart, oh Lord. Teach me to praise with my whole heart, Please stand with me as you're able.